Okay, so we are going to now talk about an extremely important topic, and that is the Great War, as it was called at the time, later to become World War I, because unfortunately we would soon get World War II. I always make the comment that World War II is the war that Americans often think that they know about, and World War I is the one that they know they don't know about. And my statement about World War II is that, which we'll talk about once we cover it, is that in both wars, if we're doing any studying at all, we tend to look at things strictly through the lens of our perspective on the wars and how it affected us, which makes total sense because every nation focuses on what affects you immediately, right? Okay, so that totally makes sense. But I think we do lose. I mean, I think that Americans have a very kind of ridiculous sense of World War II. And because they reduce it to where it's affected us, or to, Nazi Germany. I mean, everybody knows the word Hitler. And they know Nazis, they know Holocaust, they know Pearl Harbor. But what else? I mean, the Soviet Union experienced almost 40% or more of the casualties in the war. And the one thing that in both wars, the difference between the United States and the rest of the world, we tend to forget that Pearl Harbor is our big catastrophe, right? That we got attacked. Well, it's not even our own soil. It's our colony in Hawaii that we took from the Hawaiians that we got hit. Okay, let's be real. Okay, where we got attacked. Now, I'm not making light of the people who got attacked at Pearl Harbor, but what I'm saying is, as we learn about these wars were all fought everywhere but the United States. We never had ourselves carpet bombed by enemy jets, right? Planes, or we didn't experience trench warfare here. Our Civil War was the worst war we did to each other worse. That's our worst war. Was 500,000 Americans killing each other over the issue of slavery and the American Civil War, and that was catastrophic. But imagine that actually on a much worse level. That's what people experience all throughout Europe, and we just never did. And so while our troops that went overseas suffered greatly because they were, had to be participants in these very, very grueling wars, Americans suffered. I mean, spouses and family members of our loved ones that went overseas. The economy here had problems. Foreigners at times felt pressure and attacked by a lot of Americans that were afraid of foreigners, heightened by the war. There was more of a fear that's going to end up coming with communism later on. But again, not to the same degree. Now, on the same token, I want to get back to say that I think reading the textbook and focusing on certain aspects of how the war affected us, of course, makes sense. But I decided that I am going to attach my lecture that I already have on World War I, that is from my World Civ class, because I think for us as Americans to understand our own aspects of our wars, that it would be good to sometimes reflect upon what the meaning of these events that we participated in beyond just the United States. Some people might disagree with my approach on this, but it was called the World War. It's not called the American War, the Western Hemisphere War. Okay, so we participated in something that was quite complex, that was based on, developments that happened in Europe. And what I just kind of want to say, if you look at this timeline here, and you see, which I'll discuss more, and you'll see discussed in my other lectures. Basically, Europe, the peace was set up in a complicated way. There were all these alliances where basically someone says, if you attack this person, then we have to attack you. And if we attack you, then you have a friend that says they're going to attack us. And so it's easy to see how a kind of chain of events can happen. And this is what we often kind of lose sight of, how certain things can escalate very quickly, seeming like almost out of nowhere. But there's reasons. I mean, just for example, I always say, if like North Korea is not a military threat to like really the South, like to anyone. I mean, they could, I mean, comparative strength wise, South Korea is more beefed up, even without US troops there in South Korea. And Japan is quite beefed up. But, if North Korea ever attacked, let's say, South Korea or Japan right now, the United States has a treaty with to protect Japan and South Korea. So an attack on South Korea or Japan would then be an attack on us. China has a somewhat reluctant alliance with North Korea, which would force, and they hate Japan. So China then would be forced to take a position, most likely decide with North Korea, even if they really didn't want to. And oh my gosh, you could just escalate into another global war by a simple act of a small state that's isolated, but then tests the bounds of alliances. Okay, right? And in World War I, we see that I feel like if you look, there was almost like certain regimes kind of almost wanting to make things happen. I mean, I always kind of wonder if it was actually be possible to not see something come out of the way the arrangements were. But having said that, that's Europe, not the United States. This is European issues. This is European drama, right? Okay. And so this led, of course, a lot of Americans. That I just want to focus a little bit on some things that are not covered as much in my other lectures. President Wilson saw that Americans did not want to get involved in a European war. And so, it says, what does he say? Vote for Wilson, peace with honor. Who keeps us out of war? Right? Okay. And that was the mood of the country. And this makes sense. I mean, the isolationism of the United States, we were predominantly European in ethnicity from west to east. And many immigrants came to the United States to escape Europe, to get away from the problems of Europe. Okay, right? That's why so many of us with European ancestry, when we talk to our great-grandparents and ask them, questions, I mean, we're not speaking, I grew up in the Central Valley with a large Swedish-American population that never taught Swedish or used Swedish. I mean, they ended the Swedish speaking almost immediately, and they just kind of became American. They just acclimated. They kind of cut off themselves from their European roots in many ways. And so a lot of that is them turning their backs on the old country to then support and be a part of a new one. So in that sense, it makes sense that Americans were so isolationist. But then you have the other problem. It's one thing to be isolationist militarily and politically, but if you have a global economy and you have certain industries that you want to do business with, if America says we're going to be neutral and we do business with Germany and we help bolster the German economy, then that obviously hurts Britain or other European nations who are trying to win Germany, and then they may take that as support and start attacking us, right? So in other words, if you're going to be neutral politically, but you want to try to do business as usual when things are not in usual times, you're going to find yourself probably getting forced into some sort of position, okay? And so, we can also appreciate the difficulty. I mean, if I was a president at the time, I'd probably agree with the sentiments, like, why be involved in the European war? I mean, we didn't get involved in that little power game struggle of alliances that were set up. But at the same time, unless we want to completely cut off trade and hurt certain industries here, can we afford to not do business overseas and keep out of it? And then how would you be able to maintain peace? This is going to be difficult, right? It is a difficult time, okay? So think about that. Now, eventually, I'm kind of skipping over things because you're going to watch a whole documentary on this, but there's just something, I'm going to have you see my other lectures. And I think I do mention this also in my other lectures, but I just want to talk about the Zimmerman telegram. And this is when the German foreign minister, Arthur Zimmerman, offered to help Mexico recover Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if Mexico would start a borderland war with the United States and ask Japan to join them. I really want to stress the idea to remind us that at the beginning of World War I, our western frontier was still just newly acquired. I mean, think about that expansion of the Native and the ethnic cleansing of Native Americans that we talked about at the beginning of this class. And that the Mexican-American War, President Polk, he started the war with Mexico and took land from Mexico and started to fill it up with Western migration. Okay? And so, I said this in my lecture and my other one, but I just want to remind us that this is a threat that could never work again. Okay? Because now that territory is too filled up. But we have to remember that we acquired Mexican territories, the ones that are talked about here, in 1848. 1848. Very long. I mean, not that very long ago, right? Okay? So just kind of wrap your mind around that. Okay, so here's a map looking at Europe, just to kind of give you also perspective. I'm gonna show you some other maps as well in my series of lectures. Don't forget to look at the textbook though, and I want you to also kind of look at how ethnicities also had to deal with things during this time. Different ethnicities in America, and also the flu epidemic on page 614. Something I also talk about, but the Spanish influenza catastrophe that happened in this time is, I don't know why it's not talked about more. Maybe it's just too scary. I mean, it's the scariest part of the war to me, is when you have, wars, we make these bad decisions, but then when the natural world almost turns against all of us indiscriminately, I find that actually much more horrifying. And the war certainly made it worse, but I think it's just, I don't know, it's heavy. It's something to reflect upon. In any case, I'm going to now have you watch my lectures covering World War I.